As the world begins to emerge from the cave of the 21st century and opens its eyes onto the suffering from centuries of injustice and the bastardization of what it means to be free, the New Nomos podcast is a call for a new beginning, a call for the new men and the new women that yearn to be truly free, a call for us to fulfill our destiny, a call for a new Nomos on the earth. Welcome to the New Nomos podcast. I'm Tazeen Dutton, inviting you to join me on this journey of discovery, to define what the New Nomos is and what we need to get there. This episode was inspired by the previous one with Lubomir Arsov, the director of the monumental short film In Shadow, and in particular the ending, where you have man and woman rising up in their glory with dignity, joining together in connection with the higher realms and with the lower realms, and the product of that is the child of light and the child of love, and those images being the solution for all of the darkness that comes before it in the film. And I wanted to explore this theme in more detail, and who better to do this with than my mother. Not only the woman that brought me into this world, but also an expert in early childhood development, and now a practitioner in body stress release. And through listening to this episode, you will understand how her journey moved from early childhood development into body stress release, and why. Because from her work with thousands of children, she realized that the child and the domestic situation were not disconnected, and therefore when the child was coming to the school in a state of stress, this was because what was happening at home was stressful, and therefore it was the adults that needed to do the work so that the child could flourish in their fullness. And so here we are. Without further ado, I present to you episode 36 with my mother, Tazeen Dutton, Brave New Children, Early Childhood Development and Body Stress Release.
Listening to Lubomir and you in that interview, and then afterwards watching it, and all the different emotions that were going through me, it's like almost like at points, feeling really sick and kind of, where is this leading to? And then I just thought the ending was just epic, even to the point of where the eyes open up. But for me, being a doula and helping women have babies, not on a professional level, I do it for friends and people who have asked, but that image of the man rising up and then the woman and that the wings of her taking off, and then the two of them together producing this child that was just light. And if you're with a child that takes its first breath, it's so pure and there's just nothing but light, and it moves the soul, and the tears flow just in that moment of this ball of energy that emerges. It got me thinking okay, how did we get to this place where everywhere you look, people are stressed, and what you see is even children are stressed. Where's all this heading? I started reflecting a lot on that. And man, and what's man doing? Woman, what's woman doing? Children, where are they heading? And I remember somebody once said to me that if you look at the politicians and you want to really look at, is this a good leader? Look at the old people and look at the young people. Are they being looked after? And looking back to my own life, got married at 21, had my first child at 22, bringing up 5 children, basically on my own a lot of the time because the husband had to work. But the pressure to work was always there. And I'd go to some lunches with your father and, people would say, oh, and what do you do, Mrs. Dutton? And at that time I was bringing up the children. I said, oh, I'm a housewife, or there was another word that I started using because it was more acceptable. Home engineer or something. I can't remember. But the point was, people, oh, no, but what do you do? And I said, that's what I do. I look after, I'm bringing up my children and, I look after the house. But it was almost like, no, but what, your job, that is my job. I just don't get paid for it. But the way society looks at that also makes one feel that you're doing something that's not valuable. But again, now things have changed, and I see young people, and it's just got so much harder, because when I was young, I was part of a lot of women that were stay-at-home mums, and we did a lot of things together. But now the pressure for women to go out to work is a lot more. And so what you're seeing is women are getting isolated, and it's just too much. A woman cannot do it all. She can't be the teacher, the cook, the cleaner, bringing up the child, and then having no company. Colette, whose mother, Sido, it's written very beautifully of her memories of her childhood, where the children would be outside in the garden and the mother would go and say, come on, children, it's lunchtime. And she couldn't see the children, but she knew, her senses were, she knew exactly where all the children were. One would be reading a book up a tree, another would be hiding kind of like in the bushes. They were free. We don't have that same freedom for children now. They're cooped up in the house. We've got social media. Mother can't cope, so she has to allow them to have either an iPad or a laptop or phones now, and it's heading towards children not being very sociable.
What led you into early childhood development?
I wanted my children to be the best, and I knew to have the best, I needed to know everything about child development, so that I did it to my best. That's what led me to it. I got into Maria Montessori very early on. I think your sister was, she was 5 and you were 3. She was at school and you were at nursery school. And so the mornings I would, I was doing it correspondence. So the sentence that attracted me to Maria Montessori was the spiritual embryo, because Maria Montessori speaks a lot about early childhood, where the child is not an individual yet, because the child is still connected to the mother through the nervous system. And then after 3, the social development comes in. So then it becomes very important for the child to be with other children. And then I got onto Waldorf, because the Waldorf method was, because the society was changing, that Rudolf Steiner felt that the children needed a home, because people were not having a lot of children and they needed interaction with other children. So that's where the Waldorf came into my life, because I kind of thought, that sounds interesting. And he tried to produce a kind of like a mother figure in the classroom. So there was very much, the women would wear long dresses so the children could hold on to them. The whole curriculum flowed around the child. So that's how I got into the Waldorf education system. And then after that, I started seeing Maria Montessori started becoming almost like a religion, and the Waldorf too was kind of like, I just felt that the people who were the teachers and the people who were involved with those things, they couldn't see anything else, and it wasn't enough for me. I felt like there was always the thing of our time and where we are now. We also moved to Edinburgh, and what I realized with the early years education system in Edinburgh, that they took a bit of Montessori and they took a bit of Waldorf, and they had what was called childcare and education. So that's when I did my HND in childcare and education in Edinburgh. By that time I'd already had Naima. It was, so by that time I had 5 children, and when she went to school I trained as a nursery nurse, I guess you could say. From there we moved on to, we went to Cape Town. By that time, I'd collected a lot of things myself and made up my own curriculum almost. And in Cape Town, the head teacher of a school called Forries, she wanted somebody to work in her preschool, but where it was very open to new curriculums. And that's where I was able to form my own curriculum, in a sense, using what I'd learnt in Edinburgh, then experience of my own children, and the Maria Montessori and the Waldorf, and putting all of that together into the free flow. Also bringing in nature, because I feel children and nature, you can't separate it, it's one. And then taking from Montessori the free flow and bringing in the Waldorf of the mother. And I was very fortunate because Kim, the owner of Forries, allowed me to do whatever I wanted. So I set up my own curriculum there with the garden. The children would help in the garden. We had our organic garden growing, and then from there we'd have free flow snack where it was just laid out. The children would help you do the snack. We'd have parents coming in every day. We had a rota that every day a parent came in to help with the free flow snacks. So the children will cook things. We made sushi, we made paella, we made kind of like curries. There was nothing that these 4 or 5-year-olds couldn't do, and they were using real knives and stuff. And it was very holistic, but that led on to working with the parents. There was you'd find things that were not quite going well with the children, and you talk to the parents, and it's like the preschool is not isolated from the home. So you've got a community, and the whole preschool was, in a sense, like a community. So there's a lot of work going on with the parents outside as well. And that then led on to really seeing the stress, because one started noticing that the children were getting stressed. And then I used to see that it was because the parents were so stressed, and this stress kept kind of coming in. And I used to think, gosh, what we need is something to de-stress parents. And then maybe they can be a bit more freer with the children. And then your father retired, and we ended up in England, and I was looking for things for your younger sister was wanting to, do something holistic for her university degree. And we came across Body Stress Release, and she read it and kind of like, wasn't really interested. But the more I read into it, I kind of felt, wow, this is what I'm looking at. And you had to be over 30 years old to actually do it. So I applied, and I got onto the course. It was 5 months in Dorset, working with the body. And in a sense, a lot of things that I've found while doing the course was, a lot of it was to do with unpacking myself, because it was the first time since I was a young 21-year-old that I wasn't a daughter, I wasn't a wife, I wasn't a mother, I was just me. And because I was living on my own there, it forced me to look into myself, which brought up a whole lot of other things, many moments of just crying and feeling useless. And I'd have to, the course involved a lot of anatomy. I was never good at languages, but it was like learning a whole new language, and had to really push and push and push. As I was going through the process while doing the course, it was almost like things were happening in the course, and because I was going through it myself, I was learning. So whatever I was learning was also happening inside of me, if you see what I mean. And so what I realized was, as I was unpacking something inside, something outside was changing. And then there was the place where I was staying, there was a wood. It was where D.H. Lawrence used to write. And I used to go out there into that wood, and things would happen. There was like one of the days I was walking down, and then apparently there was a stag that nobody had seen, but apparently he's a very mature stag, and everybody used to talk about him. And I went just after dawn. The sun hadn't quite got high, it was very low, it was quite dark. And I remember walking there, and then after about half an hour of walking on my own in this wood, there was a slight hill, and standing there was the stag. His antlers, huge kind of antlers, and he just stood there and looked at me, and I looked at it, and there was just, it's very difficult to explain. There was almost like it was in control. It decided to come out because it knew I was coming. And in a sense, it was almost like there was a contact, its eyes and my eyes, and there was almost like a greeting. And while I was in the moment, it was just beautiful, and just everything was just about the moment. But then I put my hand in, because I thought I'd like to take a picture, and the minute I moved my hand to put it in, it was gone. So it was like, this was not about a photograph, it was about being in the moment. And then the thing about the whole unpacking as well was, I had to face those things of myself, because at school I was never very good at school. I didn't pass a lot of my subjects, and there was this fear. But as I went in and almost like faced my fear, I saw, going in for the exams, I wasn't afraid. And then from getting 13%, I ended up getting 85%. And it's like the teacher was like, whoa, what's going on here? I just couldn't explain it. But there was something it was a process that started happening, and I was told that you couldn't pass unless you got 75% and over, and I ended up getting 85% for the whole thing, so I passed. But then it was like it's been a journey. Kind of sometimes we're looking at answers in our head, and I just feel they're not in there, they're not in our head, they're inside in our hearts. So if we can just be in the moment and experience the feelings and the emotions, something starts changing. So again, going back to that scene of them in the shadow, you know, one thinks, well, how can we get to that point where there's just light?
What I'm doing is helping people to balance the mind with the heart. And is that the heart has the answers, but the mind suppresses it and blocks it with its own narratives and conditioning and everything that's been put on us.
So is that the ego?
I don't want to look at it from that perspective of defining it by this or by that, but is that the mind has narratives and the heart is in connection with the divine. Now, the heart has the answers, but it's been blocked out by the heart's language is feeling and thought, and the mind's language is logic and rational and concepts and ideas. Now, if you can align the two and get them in balance, then they can work in conjunction with each other so that the heart's feeling emerges and the mind can act it out in the most efficient way possible. So if that's whether you want to be rich and that's your goal and you want to work towards that, or if you want to create a new society, or if you just want to have a better relationship in your household, etc., etc. So it is that thing that, like you were saying, that you don't think we can think the solutions. We have to almost feel the way forward. And I think that's very relevant.
And what was interesting about body stress release is that everything problematic goes back to somewhere in our life. And the majority of things does go back to your childhood. And like Gabor Mate talks about trauma, and he says we're all traumatized. So where is all that traumatization coming? And he puts it down to when there isn't any nurturing going on with children, then what happens is they detach. And the mind kind of takes over more than the feelings, because the child doesn't want to get hurt, and so then it starts acting to what makes the parents happy, because they have to survive. And that's the tools that the child has at his disposal to survive. And then later on in life, they're still using those tools, but they don't need to, because they don't need their parents to survive anymore. So what I see is for the person to become whole, because then you're not whole anymore and you're not authentic. So somehow you've got to get back to being authentic. And how do you do that? Because what happens is when there's trauma, it's trapped in the body. And stress is also a good thing, because it pushes us and helps us do great things. And if there's a danger, it helps us run away. But what you find is that stress on top of stress on top of stress gets to the point where it's stress overload and it's impacted, and then you start getting disease. You start getting things wrong with you because the body can't hold it anymore. So how do you get rid of that trauma? How do you get rid of stress? All the chemicals that are running in you? How do you get rid? It's through touch.
So what is body stress release and what does it do?
Body stress release locates where there's tension in the body due to stress, and you find it through what they call body feedback mechanism. And the largest muscles are in the leg. So what happens is, as you touch various parts of the body, you can locate where there's stress overload. And how you know there's stress overload is because the largest muscles are in the leg and the foot moves a little bit. So then when there's stress overload, you see the muscle move, and then you release that. And then as you go through releasing it, what will happen with your client is that you have to have 3 sessions. And after the 3rd day of having body stress release, they will start getting a memory, or they'll get pain, or there'll be dreams that start coming out. And through that, you can work out where you will release the next layers of stress, because it's like an onion. You've got layers and layers and layers, and depending how deep, children are very quick because they've not got a lot of layers, but with adults, they may be, your trauma may go back to way back, and then you have to, the layers come off stage by stage like an onion. It starts peeling it, and then you work on that. So then you work on the event itself. When the client feels safe, and the body feels safe, things start emerging, and then they've gone. The memories are gone. The trauma. It's a bit like when you've got a credit card and you swipe the credit card. When you've got, it's got all your information on it.
Right.
But if you get a magnet and you swipe the magnet over the credit card doesn't work anymore because all the information's gone. Yeah. So it's a little bit like that, when the stress comes to the surface and you get to the event of what that was, then it leaves. So you're free from it. And the result is you suddenly get a lot of energy and you feel young again, because one doesn't realize that, because we don't know we're holding all this stress. We don't realize that this sluggishness and being lethargic sometimes is to do with because the body's just holding too much. And as the layers come out and as it's released, you start feeling young again.
But you're making it sound like it's a once-off. Like once you get it, once you bring it up to the surface and it's done, it's gone, finished, and you'll never get it back, or what? Suddenly you're going to be super energetic and young for the rest of your life.
It takes time. It's not going to just happen with a one-off, depending on how many layers you've got. But eventually you will get to that point where you will find yourself and who you actually are. That's where you're heading. And once you know yourself, you know the whole of creation and where you fit in it. Okay. It sounds all very kind of like all too easy, but it's pretty amazing. Even with pain, because the stress comes in 3 levels. There's emotional stress, chemical stress, and physical stress. And sometimes with physical stress, you may hurt yourself somewhere and you think you've dealt with it, but because you've gone, you haven't really rested it properly, the muscles are holding it. And then later on in life, there's this niggling pain that keeps coming, and it's because it hasn't healed. And the nervous system has blocked it from healing. So one of the effects of body stress release can be that you release tension, and it's very, very subtle. The client doesn't even feel you're doing anything, and then they'll go away and they'll be in agony. And kind of think, oh my gosh, what's she done to me? Because it's the pain that hasn't. Because pain, no gain. When you have pain, it sends a message to the brain saying there's a problem here. We need to heal it. And so then the body goes into work. And it clears up the damage or whatever you did years ago. Sometimes it goes back to your childhood.
But then emotional pain can't be healed in the same way.
No,
you can't tell the brain.
No, emotional pain comes out as memory. There'll be a memory. Suddenly you'll have a dream or a memory of an event.
Right.
And then for example, one of the clients was talking about this thing that she had with her mother, and it kind of like came up, and she said she didn't really ever realize it. She had this problem with her mum, but she didn't realize that it was this deep-seated problem. So it came up to the surface, and then she spoke to her mum, and then there was a thing that went on between the two of them, where one had to, the mother was allowed to talk to what the situation was when the event took place. The daughter forgave the mother, and and they cried and they hugged, and something changed in both of them, and they started having a better. I mean, I'm just simplifying it. Obviously these takes time. This doesn't happen overnight. But once the body has triggered something, and the client is looking into it, what you find is, because you're looking into something inside of you, something outside starts changing. But the client has to do the work. All the body stress release practitioner does is releases the tension, which then is a catalyst to other things happening in the person's life. And you have to then, in some cases, it's the job, in some cases it's friends or whatever. There's issues that are going on in your life, but you are made to face them.
Well, the thing is that if you change the way you see the world changes, because it's you're the person, you're the entity experiencing your universe. So if you choose to change the way that you see the universe, the universe changes, and everyone knows that that's a reality because everyone has experienced it in some shape or form, and sometimes it's because we've chosen it, and sometimes it's because it just happens. You're thinking, oh, this person hates me, blah blah blah, they gave me these eyes, gave me that, and then eventually whether it's 2 years down the line or whatever it is, you have a conversation about it, and they're like, "Oh no, I was just having a really bad day that day," and so you've created this whole story about this person, and it was absolutely not true.
Yeah,
you created it, and then you realized. So in that point, you could have been in that same arena and chosen to see it differently, and it would have been different.
Yeah. A lot of pain is due to what you're thinking and believing, your habits that you've got into, which is then your personality. And how do you change your personality? By working on yourself. And everything is a mirror. Life is a mirror.
Yeah.
So what you're seeing out there is really what you're seeing inside.
Exactly. So if you change what's inside, then outside becomes different. And that's my point when bringing it back to In Shadow. What really spoke to me when I watched it the first time was that it's a kind of cross section through our time, and all of the ill and bad and the way that our society has degenerated. But it also gives a very positive and uplifting solution at the end. But it doesn't just jump from one thing to the next. In order to get from the time that we live in to unlocking yourself and the rebirth and the emergence in your highest form is a journey that is painful. And there's that one scene where, as the man's emerging in himself, is he has to go into the fear. And there's the one image, and it's all kind of red and fiery, like blurry. And there's this massive kind of like devil-like thing there that he's going towards. And that is facing a deepest fear.
Yeah. Kind of cuts through all of that.
Yeah, but once you go through it and then you emerge, it's like then there's complete rebirth. And then you can unlock this heart of yours and let the light shine from it, because the world needs that. And then you rise up in your dignity and glory. And by your doing it, you will see other people doing it, and you can build community and build groupings of people that are in synchronicity with each other, yearning for something higher, not yearning for a few dollars or pounds that are depreciating in your pocket.
Yeah, but very difficult, because everything is about money. You know, if you just think of a woman that doesn't want to go to work, but her husband isn't earning a lot of money, and she wants to stay at home with the children. And the way women are created is that, you know, we're nurturers, you know, and if we know that there's not enough kind of coming in, and it's the children that are going to suffer. She can do without the food and everything, but they're going to need a home. And they call it the women giving syndrome. This is why a lot of women are getting burnt out, because you also can see your husband struggling, or your partner struggling, or somebody, you know, you're the man of the house struggling, and you want to support him. So then you need to go out and earn some money as well. So then what's happening to the children? Well, society tells us they can go to the, you know, creche, then go to the play group, and they'll be okay. But if you look from the child's point, that's not okay. Because as we spoke about earlier, the spiritual embryo needs the mother. If it's not the mother, it needs another woman that's going to be nurturing it. So therefore, you had wet nurses where another woman would breastfeed the child, and then the child will be whole, because we're talking about the separation that happens when the child doesn't get that. So what we're seeing now in society is that wholeness is almost like not happening. That it's being separated. The child is being, it's not whole anymore. It's separate. The heart and the mind are becoming separate. Normally they work together, but to survive, they've become separate. Bowlby talks about the detachment theory. And that's what it is, where the child just turns away because it's too painful. It is unconscious, the things happening. So, you know, a woman would just love this great man to kind of like, you know, that's what every woman's looking for, the great man that will do everything. And then, you know, for her to have her career, the children get what they need. So, you know, it's like very difficult to kind of like fathom, how does it all work? How can you...
What great man?
Because, well, any man that's going to be able to, you know, where are the great men? I hear a lot of women kind of like saying, you know, there's so many women that can't get married because they're looking for a great man.
Yeah, but what is a great man?
A great man is
somebody who has money?
No, someone who is brave enough to look at himself and change himself and support the woman, see where she's at. Like we're talking about those politicians, when the woman, old people and children are safe, you've got a great man.
You've got a great leader.
Great leader, but if you've got a household, that's your little world, really, isn't it? Your family setting is a smaller micro of that macro outside. So whatever's happening in your family is whatever's happening is also happening outside in the society.
The external oppression has filtered its way all the way down to the familial situation and to the personal situation where everything is oppressive. Mm-hmm. And so now if you can unlock and free yourself and then unlock and free your family situation, that by extension in its reverse, because everything's in its opposite, creates that healthy dynamic which can grow and spread out. Yeah. And these things do take time and they do take generations.
It can't be done in a nuclear family. It has to be a village. We go back to that saying of, it takes a village to raise a child. Mm. Otherwise you just get clones of the mother and the father. So to really, find that part of you that's not your mother, that's not your father, you need a relationship with other people. Mm. And so how do you bring that about today when everyone's thinking on that line of finance and money? I can't afford this and I can't afford that. Then somehow, in my opinion, I have to break away from that because there's something, I was listening to one of, I can't remember his name, but he was saying more of as you go inside yourself and you are present in the moment and not think of, and not try and think of all those things you want, but rather sit with it and open your heart to it's coming to you anyway. If you can be still in it, it's coming to you. I'm not explaining this properly.
No, it makes sense. I understand what you're saying. If you can feel the feeling that you want to feel by having the thing will come to you.
Yeah, because we are not in control. There's something larger at play. There's something larger that's in control. We are not in control. And sometimes I think, we think we're in control.
Well, that's a big problem because if you think that you are in control, then when you fear then a situation where you have no control, you will avoid. Mm. So you stay within the same system. It's what is in the 10 Symphonies about the autistic child. Mm. Is that the autistic child, like autism is the disease of our time. Mm. Because the autistic child can only function within what it already knows. So there can be no spontaneity because spontaneity is going towards the unknown. Mm. And so the autistic child is the manifestation of the democratic system. The democratic system within this kind of liberal capitalist society. And so you produce that because they want a robotic human that isn't free to act out their full humanness. And so the society is built to create that being because robotic humans are much easier to control. And that's...
Well, take your child away from the mother and you will get a robot.
Boom.
That just came out into my kind of like, because there is something in the eyes of the mother and the child as well. Mm. When you look into, and what you see, what I see is also that the mothers are not looking into the eyes of their children. They're looking on the screens. Mm. So then the child has to, suddenly the screen becomes the mother in a sense of that's where he's looking. You should see the way children are, going for the screen. These little kind of mobile phones. It's so subtle. It's so subtle. But they're born in it. And this is what I'm saying. The child is born in its time. So already something's kind of like breaking. And then it just, again, so then how do you help? It has to be by working with young people and allowing them to find themselves so that they can become whole again. Because for every state, there's an answer. And this is what's beautiful about that, the imagery in the shadow is that, there's hope. There's, and again, it comes with, don't see the world as all this dark, but just see the light and there will be light. But the work
Yeah.
is very difficult because nobody wants to look at themselves.
Why does nobody want to look at themselves?
It's going into deep places that everybody's hurting and nobody wants more pain, and to go deep into yourself, it's painful.
This is what I don't understand, because I've done personally a lot of this work, and I don't understand why people why people will reject going on that path, knowing that your greatest success and your greatest achievements and fulfilling your highest potential and your real destined greatness is on the other side of doing that work. So why would you not want to do that work and continue living in mediocrity or in pain or in hurt?
Unconscious doesn't want you to go there. Don't you think it's scary to face that side? It's a frightening thing, and the thing is, it's ongoing. It never stops. But there is a moment when the individual will want, or chooses to, and then you've got this kind of like then you're on the journey. But to get there or to want to, it's frightening. That's why I always say the hero today is the one who's brave enough, courageous enough to look deeply inside himself.
And that's what Dr. Abdul Basir said, quoting Ernst Jünger, that the Troy of today, or the battlefield of today, is in the heart of men.
And I think people are wanting it because, if you think of all this coaching work and trauma work, especially since Gabor Mate has been speaking a lot, because Gabor Mate has a way of putting it in a language that people can access, and understand. It's almost like there is this balance in the world where there's all this kind of horrible stuff going on, but there's also this awakening of something light happening as well.
Well, it's what Lubomir is saying in that conversation we had, is that there has to be the collapse. And the collapse is coming, and you can see it. You just turn the news on, you can see everything's crumbling. I mean, it's not even the collapse is coming. The collapse happened decades ago. It's just the rubble is falling, and how are you going to dodge the falling pieces of rubble in order to get out of the labyrinth and start building and creating something somewhere else, with a different psychology
and service. I think is a when all of this kind of like does come, what you realize is we're not individuals on our own. We're connected to other people. It's when and it is about service. The more you, in a sense, get rid of yourself, the more you see the likeness in other people, because it's all interconnected. The trees, nature, animals. It's all, we're just all energy at the end of the day. It's there's a beautiful as I felt in Dorset actually with the deer. Another time I was out there in the morning and this owl just flew over my head completely, and it's so silently and gracefully, and that certain animals would come out, and I kind of started sensing that that my nervous system, when it was calm, there was almost like the animal world was trusting me and was coming out.
Oh yeah.
It was just this kind of realization that the stones, the trees, everything has a nervous system somehow that's, well, if we call our nervous system energy, that everything is kind of interconnected.
Oh yeah. I mean, yesterday I was actually sitting next to a beehive with a friend of mine, and I was right next to the opening of the hive.
Yeah.
Because it was just beautiful, and I love bees, and it's magnificent, and I can just watch them for hours.
Yeah.
And he was standing like a couple of meters away, and a bee flew past him and kind of freaked and kind of did this thing. I said, no, you can't be afraid. Because if you're afraid, you're a threat, and they'll sting you.
Yeah.
They can feel your energy.
Yeah.
So just be absolutely okay there. And it was funny, then we walked into the house, and I didn't realise that I had a bee on me. And I was just sitting there on the sofa, and I looked at my leg, and there was this bee, and it was just walking around. And I could see that it was tired.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay. And so I asked my friend to say, "Can you get me just the tiniest little bit of honey?" And I just
Amazing.
put the spoon there with a little bit of honey, and it immediately started kind of sucking it up or whatever, and then it just went away.
Yeah, it's like with cats. Yeah, it is amazing. And then even like with cats, when you feed them, they'll turn around and go meow, and it's a different meow, and it's like thank you. Yeah. And well, when I had my bees, remember when I got those bees that kind of like came, and we had a huge beehive, it was the same thing. I never wore gloves, never wore anything. It was just calm. But then you had somebody else that kind of came in, and the bees actually went crazy. They can pick up on our energy. But it was interesting talking to a bee specialist, Paula Cornelia, who lives in Somerset, and she was saying that what's happening with the bees in England, where they're giving them sugar, is that the bees are getting almost like diabetic, and therefore they're losing the ability to sense where other hives are, and then the responsibility of the younger bees, who are, you could say, teenagers, not quite mature, they are looking after the people that have hatched. So it's like they're not getting the full information because the bees are not mature. And she was saying the same thing's happening in society, where teenagers now are not listening to parents, but they are almost like listening to their peers. So you've got the younger people who are, listening to. I just thought that was fascinating. That again, what's happening in with us is all, what's happening in nature as well. It's like this we're just a small part, but responsible for all. I feel humans, with that, because we have intellect, that we should be looking after the bees, we should be looking after the fishes in the ocean and everything else. But because of the greed and the usurious system, that everything is just being destroyed. What's the word? Killed, becoming extinct, because of what man's hand is doing. And that can turn very quickly by people being more present. Can I tell you a story about a horse that had stress?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Because there's the people that work with kind of like horses, and again, going back to stress and trauma, again, which is energy, that there was a man got called in because this horse kept limping. And the owner felt there's not really anything wrong that I know of this horse. He hasn't fallen, he hasn't anything, but why is he limping? And so the specialist came over, and because the doctors couldn't find anything, the vets and everything couldn't find anything wrong with it, this person says, but I have to work with the human. I can't work alone. So the human was the owner of the horse, and he'd go through and he was mentioning things. He says, anything to do with water? And she said, not that I can think of. He said, well, has he been around some kind of like fawns or plants? No. He went through a whole list of things, and then he saw a bird flying up, and he said, maybe birds. And then the owner said, well, actually, yes, there was a nest outside his stable. There was a nest of birds, and the baby chick fell in front of the horse, and he nared, but the mother bird was away. And she said, actually, it's since then that the horse had this limp. And then the man pinpointed it to the point that it's because the stress had gone into that leg, because the horse couldn't do anything about this. So it just made me think of how animals are connected to, the horse wanted to protect this little bird, and he couldn't, and he got so stressed that it was in his leg. And then the man just whooshed his hand over the horse, kind of like, and disappeared. The horse started walking normally.
Right.
So then my question would be, can the horse hear? How did that stress disappear? They got to the point for the owner that this had happened. It's because the horse's nervous system was connected to the owner, and the owner dealt with it, wasn't worried about the horse anymore, and its fear disappeared.
Well, the thing is, a horse, they have a sixth sense. You sit on the horse, and the horse knows exactly how you're feeling.
Amazing.
And if you're going to be angry,
yeah,
the horse is going to help you off. It's like, oh, you're going to be like that.
Yeah. You don't need language, do you? And in a sense, that's one of the things when you're working with children. You don't need, in a sense, language. You can read their body language. And after working with children and having, five of my own, you start seeing that. And then what's interesting about the body stress release is that what you start seeing is I can see when that adult turns into the child by its body language, and the voice changes as well. And then you know you're getting closer to where the trauma actually went.
Say that again. You can see when that.
Well, there's body language. We have a body language, and children. Sometimes you have to guess because children can't articulate what they're doing, especially young children, and you have to guess just from their body work of what's actually going on.
Right.
And with adults, what happens is when you're doing this body stress release and therapy work with adults, that at some point you'll be asking questions or something will kind of like come up, and you'll see the body change. You see there's kind of like a movement in the body, and then the voice changes. It's almost like goes to a child's voice.
Oh, so the adult
it's very subtle.
So the adult goes back to their child.
Yeah, because we've all got that inner child. Sometimes it's very clear with people, that's it. They're hitting it. They're hitting it. That's they're getting there. There's a very beautiful image of a cage, and it's got to the adult's kind of like cage, and then the child is inside. They've drawn, it's an art piece. I don't know who it's by, but there's this child inside trying to get out. You just always want to be recognized. You're not two different people. You're the same person, but different experiences. It was interesting because I went back home to the street where I used to play a lot, and it was interesting because what I realized was I was walking down the same street, but obviously I felt the same person. But what was interesting was that, but I was a lot more maturer. I was a lot more confident. I was a lot more happier. But as a child, it was a very different story. To go to the same street with the same smells and the same kind of like, it hadn't changed much. And it was just interesting to reflect on how time changes you.
Yeah, no, I just think it's funny because I've been kind of exploring London and finding myself in these places that I know I've been to before. And then reflecting on it and being like, oh, grandma took me here. Grandma took me there.
Yeah.
So there's like all of these places in London that I went to with grandma. Hampstead Heath, the HMS Belfast, walking past the Tower of London, Tower Bridge, and I'm like, wow.
Memories.
And it just, and even going on the tube, it's like so many people hate the tube and find it really disgusting, and I can understand why. But I've just been seeing it through the eyes of 7-year-old me, going for like trips with grandma into London and just looking at all the tube maps and mapping it all out in my
it's
head.
Really interesting because when I sit in the tube, when I first kind of like recently going on my own to places, there was fear. The train, you get on the tube and the door closes. There was always this fear that what if Dad got in the train and I was left, because the doors are automatic. Because there was an incident where I was on the train with my father and a child got left outside, and the the person was on the train, and they were freaking out because the child was left on the platform.
Oh, right.
So that image is still kind of like there, and I had to tell myself, it's okay, you're a big girl. You're not going to get left on the train. Even if you do, you'll find your way out. But that fear was still there.
Amazing.
And I remember closing my eyes and sitting there, and it was going so fast. And it was the thing, I'm in the fast lane, because that's what London is. London's fast. Everything's happening so fast. It's definitely the fast lane. You get out of the train and people are just rushing, walking. It's like, whoa, what am I doing here? I wanted the countryside, like the peace and quiet with all the bees. But you have to be in the moment. In the moment, this is where I am.
One of my favourite scenes is in Bambi, when the father comes along and he like walks through the whole herd.
Yeah.
And like the child like asks the mother, it's like, why is everyone like looking at him?
Yeah.
Like, because he's the king.
Yeah.
He's the boss. And he walks around, he does his thing, and then he greets the child, looks, and there's like the interaction, and then he disappears off into the forest.
Yeah, but they had the forest with all those other animals. They were as a village.
Right, but then at the moment in which there's a threat to the herd, he's there.
Of course.
Right, and he comes charging down, and he protects the child or whatever it is, and he sorts out the problem. But he doesn't need to be there until the crisis moment. And it's the same thing with the lions. It's the same thing in nature, where the dominant male is there, and it's his presence which is uplifting, and
Yeah.
his presence, his being there is, is a gift to everyone that's there.
Yeah,
And then
and
he
it's
disappears
beautiful.
off.
Wouldn't it
But
be
then-
wonderful if we had that?
Yes, it would
But
be.
we don't.
It would be fantastic.
Yeah, but we don't, because the men are not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Right. So what are the men supposed to be doing?
Well, shouldn't they be making the society a better place
Right. How?
by making sure that you have a great leader?
But then how are the women going to support their men to make their men better men? Because the thing is, the dynamic it's about collaboration.
Yeah.
Right? But then also at the same time, like you're saying, that if the woman is stuck at home and she's having to take on the entire weight of everything and work and this and that and put money on the table and blah, 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 then that's also unfair. So what is the way forward? So how can you start trying to find some point so that the man and woman can move forward in their dignity, in their full strength and glory, like we were discussing earlier at the end of In Shadow?
Yeah, and I think it's in service of each other and supporting each other where you can, to bring out the best of each other and to really be courageous and look at yourself. And it has to be being with people and raising each other and having that village in whatever form it's going to take. But we're in a very difficult time, and we can argue with each other, or we can support each other and bring the highest part of each other out. And that is going to take a lot of sacrifice. It's not going to be handed on a plate. But if you both work towards something much bigger, and you have that, like I was saying, not so much in the head, but the heart, and kind of like serving each other, something beautiful is going to happen. And you need other people. You've got to get away from this comfortable home and, just TV and stuff, and really be driving for something higher.
Which cannot be done alone. And you cannot
do it alone. You just cannot do it alone. A woman cannot bring up her children on her own. She just can't. She's burning out. This thyroid problem that a lot of women are struggling, are finding themselves in, is because it's just stress overload, but too much for anybody to handle. I hear mum saying, they shouted at their child and everything, and then they feel really bad and guilty about it, but they're at a point where they physically can't do it. They need help.
Right, but at that point where you physically can't do it and you need help, where can you get help?
Well, this is the question.
Or where did you traditionally get help?
Family. These are the problems that are happening out there, and we don't even talk to our neighbours. You'd have the neighbourhood, you'd have your community centre, you'd have places where, when you lot were young, I used to go to mother and toddler groups. That's where I made friends. I used to go rigidly every day. I used to get out of the house. I used to take you all for kind of like walks to the play groups and meet other women. There'd be creches in the yoga classes, and you will go mad. If you're not with other women, you will start thinking there's something wrong with you and you're mental. And then there's burnout. Everybody's burning out. This is my own opinion, but I do feel that the woman's voice is not being heard, that we're crying out.
But what voice are you talking about? Because there are lots of voices that are being thrown all over Instagram and all over social media and talking about Me Too movement and equality in the workplace and all of these things. Is that the voice that you're talking about?
No, I guess there's lots of voices, isn't there? Yeah, you're right. Lots of different voices. What voice am I talking about? I guess I'm talking about mothers. Voice the cry of the mother that's on her own with all the children, which is the next generation. Yeah.
And what are they crying out for?
Help. They need help. They need holding. They need time where they're not with children. Just have a cup of tea with a book, just for an hour. I mean, this topic can go on. It spills out to all kinds of things, even the food and the vaccinations and the education system. Gosh, there's so much. Because what's happening in schools, what's happening in the education system, how free are we in thought, and then we're going to send our children to school, and there's all that kind of stuff.
Well, that is what was mentioned in the one episode on the bullfighter. because I asked Hazrat al-Basir what makes a bullfighter,
Mm.
and he said, well, it's the parents.
Mm-hmm.
But then he goes back. He said it was something to do with I can't remember the exact thing, but it was absolutely brilliant because he said it happens the moment the woman chooses the man.
Mm.
So that's what creates the bullfight. So he was saying that the moment that the woman chooses, I want that man, and that thing happens, and then eventually they have the child, and the child is a product of that, and then is the nurturing and the life of the child. Is that whole destiny is moving and is pushing towards the emergence of the bullfighter.
All right.
So it's the man that comes out.
Well, I think you're going to be a bullfighter then.
As Dr. Abdul Basir was saying, it's the same with education. And while he was teaching at the Dallas College, he said there were some people that the students you could see, and it was like they just do not have the genetic coding for it. Mm-hmm. They can't, like, you can try and do whatever you can and do it to the best of your ability, but they're not set up for this. They need to be doing something else. It begins before your time.
Yeah. Which is your sir, isn't it? It's that secret that we all carry. And again, going back to the childhood, and when you don't have that nurturing happening between the mother and the child, and there's detachment, it's very difficult to get to that sir because you're not authentic anymore. And so it's when you start doing the unpacking and looking into yourself and finding out where it all kind of like, and who you really are and what your destiny is. Well, your destiny is going to come anyway. But that thing of...
Well, it's finding who are you so you can be on your highest lifeline so that you reach your highest destiny.
And you know when you're on the right track because you start feeling joy. That's those are the signs when you start feeling happy and excited and excitement and it's like, whoa, you're doing what you're meant to be doing. And so many people are in jobs or careers or whatever doing things that they're not really happy with because they're in the wrong thing.
And what about the mother who doesn't feel happy looking after her children?
Then really she should have somebody who does feel happy. This is the thing, you see, not all women are cut out for bringing up children. There's some women are better than others. And there's nothing wrong with letting somebody else bring up your child. But this is something that has to be introduced in society. I think, the wet nurse is okay. If it's to give your child to somebody, to breastfeed your child for 2 years, and you pay her for doing it, it's okay. You'll still be their mother and they'll still know you as the mother. I mean, in the Arabian Peninsula, they did it all the time. Yeah. But what is difficult is being a career woman and trying to breastfeed your child. It's impossible. You're not going to be able to do it. Something is going to go, either your job's going to go or your child's not going to be whole. And this is the struggle that I feel in this generation of society that a lot of women are facing, because today I think there's a lot more women getting educated than men. The workplace is opening up for women a lot. And what's happening with the children? So is this kind of like this cycle going on where the child is crying and nobody's holding the child. I can give you an example. When I was doing my HND childcare and education, and I had to do some placements in a creche, and there was one adult to 3 children, and so there was 6 children, and then 2 women having 3 children each feeding the children. And what I saw was absolutely horrific, that the 2 women were talking to each other and trying to feed the child, but they're not looking at the child when they're feeding. So the spoon would sometimes hit the cheek and the child would be moving its mouth to get to the food. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is horrendous. Where's that loving look? Where's that contact? Where's that warmth? This child is going to be a robot. And Speed Biddulph, who wrote a lot about boys, was saying we're creating monsters. We're going to have monsters in the future because they won't even know what it feels like to be loved. And those early years is where you get the sense of the world. what is the world? You know, the love. Is it a loving place or is it a horrible place? So you've got all of these kind of things in early childhood that people are just not even aware of. A human child is not like an animal. It takes 3 years for the brain to even start kind of really, it's very spongy in the beginning, and by 3 it's kind of like got some of its faculties, you know, the language is developed and everything, and then from 3 to 6 it goes on to learning more movement and stuff. So it takes a good 6 years. But we don't have the environment. The child needs the environment, a loving environment. But when you've got a whole lot of stressed people, that just passes on. I mean, if you think an example of, you know, a mother and father that are working, they've both got to be at work for, say, 8 o'clock. That child has to be out of bed, dressed, fed, and sometimes they're tired and they're not hungry. They're getting to school, dropped off early so that parents can get to work. I mean, if you're looking at the child from the eyes, you know, of what's happening to the child, they're already in this fast lane stress lifestyle before they've even started. It is in school, and then no one's watching you at school. You know, if you haven't eaten, no one's going to see it, because the mother is the one that knows when the child's becoming sick, when he's eaten, when he hasn't eaten. But you haven't even got time to be sick, because now if a child's sick, how are the parents going to get to work? They better give them Calpol or some form of, you know, drug that's going to help them to sleep, so they can get or drugged up so that they can go to school. And I saw this a lot when I was working, you know, with young children. They'd be in and they'd just be sick, and you just think they need to go home. So it's like but part of the cure is knowing the sickness. When you know the sickness, you can start building on.
Half of cure.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the New Nomos podcast. I think the main theme of this episode is quite simply that if you want your children to be brave new children, then you need to be a brave new adult. And not just you alone, but in partnership. And then not just a couple, but a couple within an arena of like-minded people. And like it was said at the beginning of the episode, when you change the way you see the world changes. And you will naturally attract to yourselves those people that you have synchronicity with. And from there, it can only grow. If you'd like to get in contact with my mother, I have put her details in the episode description, alongside relevant links to what we discussed in the episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what's discussed, so please do reach out to me. You can contact me through the New Nomos Instagram page @the_new_nomos. And don't forget to follow, subscribe, and pass this episode on to anyone you think will appreciate it. So once again, thank you.